Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Page I Love. This is Kevin Sharp. Today I'm joined by the great Nicola Scott. Nicola, thank you for joining us and welcome to Comic Art Live.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me.
It was an adventure, but we got here.
We sure did.
So, you've chosen a cover today featuring a character that a lot of fans, I think, would associate with you in a more current iteration. Could you tell us what your pick is? And also, when would you have first encountered this cover out in the wild?
What I have picked is George Perez's cover for Wonder Woman #7, which I think probably came out in '87. The reason why I've chosen this particular cover was because this is my first encounter of Perez's Wonder Woman and my first encounter of a comic version of Wonder Woman that triggered in me a creative and sort of it inspired me in a way that I just hadn't been inspired by comic art that I'd seen previously, because I'd seen such limited comic art up until that point. I didn't grow up with comic books as a childhood in my childhood, so the few things that I had encountered were sort of more along the lines of Archie and Garfield. And when I would see superhero comics on the stand when I was growing up, they'd more likely be Thor or Hulk, sort of really sort of butch masculine characters that kind of scared me a little. Or if I did happen to see Wonder Woman on the cover, she would invariably be surrounded by the '70s Justice League, which would have like Green Arrow and Black Canary in it. And I'd be like, who the hell are these characters? They weren't in the Super Friends. I don't know them. And because of my limited exposure to comics, I just couldn't get into it. I walked into a store. I think I was just killing time while my mum was at the Asian grocer next door. This store in my sort of in the town near my neighborhood that I knew had some superhero things in there, and I had like 5 minutes to kill, and I'd gone in, and I cannot remember what the rest of the store had. It wasn't sort of like a modern day geeky store, and they did have a small corner of like this week's comics that just came out. And on the stand was this cover for Wonder Woman, which is story wise, I now know was like the immediate aftermath of her first encounter with Ares, which is the final issue of her original arc. So this is like the moment afterwards. And she's kind of in recovery on Paradise Island. And this image of her in this sort of bubble of vision, I don't know if it's like a magic mirror or if it's like a bubble and she's literally on Mount Olympus, but she's surrounded by all the gods on Mount Olympus. It was so jarring and so not what I expected, because my sort of preferred experience of Wonder Woman was Linda Carter at the time. And this was like a comic book version that was so sort of detailed and rich in Greek mythology in a way that I hadn't sort of properly applied to my understanding of Wonder Woman. And I just was like, what is this? What is this? And it was the first time that I'd seen her tiara drawn like this. It was the first time I'd seen these sort of larger silver bracelets as opposed to sort of little navy blue cuffs that she'd had in the comics that I didn't quite understand. And it was the first time that I'd seen the sort of WW chest plate in a way that made sense to me. So much of it was just sort of new information that was immediately intriguing. And I bought that issue, I'm pretty sure this is the first comic book I ever bought for myself. This was the first time that I felt like this is something I'm buying for me because it's speaking to me. I need to understand what this is. And obviously, George is known for his incredibly detailed storytelling and his very rich world building. I now know, because I've now gone back and read the whole series, I immediately went into sort of back issue land. So, brand new for me. I was like, where this says #7. Is there 6 issues that I'm missing? And she was like, yes. And I was like, how do I get them? And she was like, I can order them in for you. And I'm like, oh my God, yes, please. Now that I'm sort of way more familiar with his work, I really feel like his Wonder Woman series was the pinnacle of his storytelling and his art, because as rich and fabulous as Titans and Crisis was, there's something where I just feel like this is George absolutely hitting it on every single page, in every single panel, a really deep understanding. And sometimes that just sort of happens when you get to sort of properly deep dive onto a single character and their support cast, rather than having to sort of populate a book with, loads and loads and loads of characters, because you're never getting particularly familiar with an environment or a person's sort of inner story. Where with this, I feel like we got Diana's inner story, and George got to really sort of properly explore the island and the gods and Mount Olympus, and this sort of Escher-esque perspective, literally, of what Mount Olympus might look like. And this cover being my first sort of exposure to that concept of the gods sort of on every platform, in every gravitational direction, comfortably sitting and enjoying themselves, watching this sort of submerged Diana, whatever the hell's happening on that cover. It was so deeply intriguing to me that I needed to know more. When I now know, what their schedules were like, I understand the life of a professional and how much work you have to pump out pretty regularly, especially when you're doing covers as well. And this is a pretty dense cover in terms of, how well it's populated and how much architectural detail is going in. The fact that he's chosen a single point of perspective is like, that's very clever. That's a way to sort of really, streamline your storytelling. Certainly teenage me was absolutely dazzled, but I've now, inspired by this image, drawn sort of images of Olympus where, I'm using that sort of Escher-esque sort of faking the gravity in any direction. I can now sort of look at all the architectural details and go, how clever is that? I see where he's cheated. I see where he's made things a little easier for himself. I see where the perspective hasn't quite worked. But I also see how effective the finished product is. And really, it's that sort of impact and effect that you are aiming for more than you are, precision and reality, especially in a literal space that isn't based on the laws of reality.
I have to put you on the spot because it's Comic Art Live.
Sure.
Do you own any Perez original art?
Oh, original art. No, I don't. I don't. Isn't that crazy? I've met George a couple of times and he signed a few things for me, and we had had some really lovely conversations. I sort of started breaking into this business. I was already 30. I sort of started quite a bit later. My first decade, certainly the years that I was meeting him, working too hard and without spare income to start collecting things. I'm now in a much sort of better position to be able to collect things. But of course, because he's now left us, everything is worth so much more. But I became a sort of real collector of his. He was like, he and like very young Adam Hughes and possibly some Kevin Maguire in there as well, were really early influences for me in terms of sort of how they sort of weighted their lines and where they chose to put detail and where they chose to leave spaces open and breathable. Somewhere in the back of my closet, I've got like a Wonder Woman poster that I haven't seen all over the internet. And when I pulled it out for him to sign, he came to a convention in Australia. And I said, this is really embarrassing, George, but I need you to sign this thing for me.
Awesome. Well, Nicola, please let the fans know where they can find your work in the local comic store or online.
Sure thing. Well, I've just come off a year of doing Titans with Tom Taylor, and I'm presuming our first hardback, if we're lucky, will come out anytime soon, if it's not out already. One of my proudest jobs is Wonder Woman Historia, the Black Label book that I got to work on with Kelly Sue DeConnick. My volume of that is out, and the collected edition with Phil Jimenez and Jean Hara, that's out, and it's one of the projects that I am absolutely the most proud of. But in terms of new stuff that's coming out, I know that this year, 2024, DC is doing a series of artist spotlight months my month is going to be September, I think. And I have a series of covers coming out that I've now completed that are a continuation of a pretty famous series of mine already.
Well, we'll let that tease hang for now then, huh? Thank you again for joining us. Super fun chatting with you.
Yeah, you too, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me.